Hi, I'm Marc De George, National Sales Manager for Solid State Logic's audio creation products. Basically, all of the audio creation products are the things that you use both in the professional studio and at home, other than the big console that you see behind me here. I'm here to talk to you today about a couple of cool ways to use this fella right here, SiX, our little mini SSL mixer, and this guy, uh, Fusion, our two-channel bus compressor, and lots of other tone shaping tools. Some of the topics that I will be talking about today have to do with the recording, mixing, and a little bit of maybe reamping or re-recording of stuff that you would normally do in what we call the hybrid studio. Now, to define hybrid in this situation, what we're talking about is a studio where you have maybe some nice choice analog equipment that works along with whatever DAW of choice that you happen to be using. Now, you're more than welcome to have lots and lots of analog equipment if you like, but usually we find a few choice pieces suits the purpose quite nicely. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the recording process and how you might use both SiX and Fusion together jointly, meaning using them at the same time, of course, so that you can get the best out of, or best of both worlds, or best out of both tools. The first being that you would use Fusion across the inserts of the first two channels of SiX, right? We're talking about those two money channels there, and there is an insert point, as we mentioned. When you put it on there, you would get in your channel path all of the tools of Fusion. So what does that do? Well, it adds you to allows you to add a bunch of harmonic distortion with the vintage drive circuit, so you can get a little bit of flavor to tape, as we like to say. Quite often recording guitar or bass directly sounds a little bit sterile, maybe a little bit uninspired. Utilizing the vintage drive in this way makes you a little bit of a more inspired sound. You can add a little bit of character compression with the density control on vintage drive. So this density control, what it does is actually changes the character of the harmonic distortion, going from more of a harmonic content, a very rich harmonic content, to more of a compression based sound. So if you want something to sound a little bit more full, something to sound a little bit thicker, you could utilize that density knob that way. Okay, in addition to that, we were talking about that tape tone that the high frequency compressor and of course the transformer will give you. So if you are concerned about getting things to be a little less bright, a little less pokey, then you can roll off and make all of your recordings a little bit smoother just by using those two circuits. Finally, if you have the EQ, the violet EQ, and of course the SiX EQ in bell mode rather than shelf mode, you now have a 4-band EQ. The violet on Fusion acting, of course, as your low and your high shelves, and then, of course, the two knobs on SiX acting as your mid bands, so to speak. Okay, so let's talk now a little bit about mixing. So with mixing, obviously you are looking to get things to balance together, to fit together inside of the stereo spectrum or surround spectrum or immersive spectrum, whichever you happen to be doing. We're only going to be concentrating on stereo today because that's still how most music and audio production is being done. So what you would do is utilize SiX to some width, and then Fusion becomes your overall mix enhancement tool. Now, you can certainly utilize Fusion in some of the recording ways that we just talked about. Like, for instance, if you really need to tweak a vocal, using Fusion across the inserts of the first two channels, or at least one of the channels, would allow you to really dial in and get that vocal sounding great. Of course, the high pass filter on Fusion will also help roll off some of that rumble in a vocal, make it really pop out, really stand out as well. All right, so you can put Fusion on the insert of the main mix, but of course we also have a bus B. And if you utilize Fusion on bus B, what you can do is do a little bit of subgrouping. So let's say you have drums coming in on channels 3 and 4, the stereo channel there. That can then go to bus B, and then bus B becomes your drums subgroup. You can also just use, of course, channel 3 and 4 for that, but if you want a little bit of gain in between, a little bit of control in between, this would be more of the traditional way that you would do it. That would then allow you to use something like the Listen mic compressor circuit for parallel processing of your drums, a really tried and true way, especially during the 80s, with people like Hugh Padgham, Phil Collins, and of course, Peter Gabriel utilized parallel processing with the Listen mic compressor this way, and it's a great way to get a nice powerful sound out of your drum kit. In conjunction with SiX's bus comp, you can add overall mixed tone shaping, of course, with the Violet EQ, just adding a little bit of top and bottom to your mix, rounding it out a little bit. Maybe you want to use the high frequency compressor to just control some of the highs that you're getting back from your mix inside the box. And of course, you can also use the stereo imager, and all of these tools again would be how Fusion was originally intended, but certainly not the only way, as we are finding out. You can also supplement SiX capabilities by adding Fusion to one of SiX's stereo channels. So let's say you have a whole bunch of synths coming in for an EDM track, and you really just need to sweeten them up a little bit. Well, putting the Fusion there, so you would go essentially, because the stereo channels don't have inserts, but you would go out of your interface into Fusion and then into SiX, would be the easiest way to do it. Still good for gain staging, and of course, sweetening things up quite nicely. Okay, and finally, maybe you want to do a little bit of mastering or pre-mastering at home. Well, utilizing the mid-side decoder in that way, you can certainly do that. Split your tracks up, split your main mix up between mid and side, and then use external processing, such as well, if you happen to have a Fairchild 660, you could use one of those. But other than that, you can certainly use any other stereo device for mid and side processing. So if recording and mixing wasn't enough, sometimes you get tracks that are just not sounding the way that you want them. Well, you can spend a lot of time to go and re-record all of that stuff with no guarantee, of course, that it's going to sound any better. Or what a lot of people do these days is reamp, right? Reamping would normally be taking a guitar track, sending that out to the guitar amplifier and miking that up for better tone. But you can do this with any track and Fusion to enhance the recorded sound that is already there. So for instance, maybe you're using samples on your drums and the snare just doesn't have that hit or it doesn't have that harmonic content that you're really looking for. It's not really punchy enough. Fusion's vintage drive is an excellent way to add in some of that harmonic content, making that flat sample sound a whole lot more energetic and maybe even a little bit more realistic. Guitar amps, especially some of the more digital ones, although they all sound quite good. Even smaller amplifiers, which are being used in the home more often these days because big stacks are hard to record in your bedroom. They have a lot of higher mid frequencies that are just really, really nasty and get caught up in a mix and interfere with things like the vocal. You can get rid of a lot of that harshness from a guitar amp simulator plugin, for instance, by running that track out through Fusion's vintage drive and high frequency compressor and the transformer, of course, and then recording that back in, smoothing out that guitar sound so that the guitar really, really sits in that pocket where you need it to. Finally, you can add a little bit of wow to a stereo keyboard track so that you can widen things up using the stereo imager. You can add a little bit of top sparkle using the Violet EQ. If you have a really buzzy kind of sound that you're trying to utilize, some type of a saw or triangle-shaped waveform that your oscillators are putting out, smooth those out with high-frequency compressor. All right, we've obviously talked about a lot of different ways that you can use Fusion and SiX together for either home or small-scale studio production. The great thing about both of these tools is that they are professional tools. And whether you are working at home or whether you're working in a professional environment, both have the quality that will enable you to get that professional sound. Thanks for taking the time to hang out with me today, and hopefully some of these tools and suggestions will give you some ideas and inspire you to go out and create some better music. Thanks again, and thanks for supporting Solid State Logic.